Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to do my final video of the very tumultuous year that was 2018, but in today's video it is my pleasure to discuss with you my top 10 favorite fiction reads of the year. While I did have a stronger nonfiction reading year during 2018, and I will put a link down in the description box below to my top 10 nonfiction books of the year video in case you missed that, I did read some really great fiction, and I am excited to discuss some of my favorite ones of the year with you. Just like I did in my nonfiction video, I do need to give my yearly disclaimer that these are simply the books that I read over the calendar year of 2018. They were not necessarily published in 2018, though some of them were. And this list is ranked from number 10 to number 1, so I will start off with my least favorite and move all the way up to my very favorite fiction read of the year. So, my 10th favorite fiction book of the year was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. This is a romance book that has been extremely popular on BookTube this year. It's the story of Stella, a successful young professional who has been less successful in her romantic endeavors. Stella has Asperger's syndrome and lacks the social skills to be able to connect someone in the way that she wants to, both emotionally and physically. Worried that her lack of skills in the bedroom are going to keep her from her happily ever after that she wants and her parents want for her, she decides to hire a male escort to teach her the ropes. As I said, this is a romance book, so you can probably guess that Stella and this escort, the sexy biracial Michael, hit it off in just about every way. I've not read much romance, but not for any kind of a snobbish reason. I actually really don't like that romance is so looked down upon, because I loved this book. Not only was it sexy and engaging, but it had characters with unique perspectives and experiences. There is so much to enjoy in this book, but also so much to learn from. You get to learn about people with Asperger's syndrome. You get to learn about Vietnamese culture, and you get to learn about consent. It is super hot and worth all the hype. My 9th favorite fiction book of the year is The Incarnations by Susan Barker. Earlier this year, I talked about how this was one of those books that I just can't get out of my head, and because of that, it earned its spot on this list. In this story, a taxi cab driver in modern China starts to receive anonymous letters from someone claiming to be his soulmate reincarnated. The letters go on to tell the stories of these two soulmates as they've connected during various periods throughout Chinese history, but they also become more urgent in their insistence that these two soulmates break the vicious cycle of being each other's downfall during this lifetime. I must warn you that this book is brutal in its depictions of violence, but although it can be unnerving, it is positively transfixing. It's a well-balanced story that kept me guessing during the entire reading experience and has haunted my thoughts long after completion. Coming in at number 8 on this list is The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri. This is a great work of literary fiction that takes on the multi-generational tale of an Indian family who ends up living in the United States. We meet the two parents of this family, Ashima and Ashok, when their marriage is first arranged, and then we follow them through their initial adjustments to American life, to starting a family in a foreign land, and then through raising their children and sending them off into a world that they become acclimated to but don't always fully understand culturally. Their son, Gogol, accidentally ends up with his unique Russian-inspired name, which, unbeknownst to everyone, has great emotional meaning for his father, Ashok, but his name becomes a powerful symbol throughout the novel of Gogol's connection to, but also his rejection of his native culture. The way this story is written makes you so invested in the internal and external struggles of all these characters. It was one of those books that I was heartbroken to finish because I was just not ready to say goodbye to these characters. My 7th favorite book of the year is The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer. I love Meg Wolitzer. The Interestings is one of my very, very favorite books. And so when this one was released this year, I was worried it wasn't going to be able to bear the weight of my expectations, but I had a great experience reading this. This story has 3 main characters. There is the young student Greer, her long-term boyfriend Corey, and her eventual mentor and employer, Faith Frank. Greer, by chance, first connects with Faith at a talk that Greer is dragged to by her college friend, and years later, once Greer has graduated, she ends up working for Faith's newly formed feminist foundation. Faith is a feminist icon of decades past, and though she really left her mark and inspired change, she struggles to connect with the new wave feminism that Greer's generation champions. In the critiques I have seen of this book, I see a lot of people tearing it apart for its portrayal of white feminism. But I think what a lot of people have missed about this book is that I very much believe it to be a critique of white feminism. Just because a book shines a light on something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's applauding it. And in fact, I think Meg Wolitzer was attempting to show through the character of Faith Frank that early trailblazers, although they may have done good work, don't always represent the entirety of a movement and are certainly not without flaws. Tucked in this book are also discussions of the benefits and hazards of having an idol, as well as the rewards and dangers of investing in a romantic relationship at a very young age. I loved this story and the conversation that I believe it was trying to have with its reader. The sixth book on this list is Villette by Charlotte Bronte. Being such a big fan of Jane Eyre as I am, I was really skeptical to think that I could ever love another Bronte book as much as I love that book, but this one certainly gives it a run for its money. This is the story of Lucy Snow, who after a mysterious and unnamed family emergency leaves her without support, decides to move to France. There she acquires a position teaching English at a girls' school where she deals with a busybody headmistress, precocious pupils, and two unlikely love interests. This has a lot of similar elements to Jane Eyre, but is distinctly more grown up and jaded, though not necessarily in a negative way. There is a hardened vein of realism going through this book that makes Lucy Snow less likable to some people, but to me, it made her all the more flesh and blood. Like most books I end up loving, I adored the questions this book was asking of its reader, particularly about the many faces that we as women present to the world. But which are the masks and which is our own true likeness? Moving into the top 5 on this list, the next book is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is another BookTube darling that is well deserving of all the hype surrounding it. In fact, this is one of the few books that I've seen be universally loved across BookTube. In this book, a young journalist is handpicked, seemingly at random, by the Golden Age Hollywood star Evelyn Hugo to pen her memoir. Previously, Evelyn has been infamously tight-lipped about her life story, particularly about the stories behind her 7 highly publicized marriages. Not only is the story that Evelyn begins to tell fascinating at every bend, but there are lingering questions that will keep you on the edge of your seat, like, number 1, why is she choosing now to spill her guts after so many years of being silent? And number 2, why did she ask for this obscure, inexperienced journalist by name to write her story? The character of Evelyn is so fully realized and complex. I loved every moment of this book, especially the Vegas scene. My 4th favorite fiction read of the year is Middlemarch by George Eliot. When I first finished this book in March, I was initially disappointed that I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, but my good friend Steve Donahue predicted that this book would really stick with me. And boy, was he ever correct, because this book has stayed with me in such a big way and therefore has developed into one of my favorite fiction reads of the year. I've just not been able to shake the story of Dorothea and her unhappy prison of a marriage or any of the other complicated relationships in the town of Middlemarch, nor have I been able to get over the skill with which this masterpiece was written. I've never experienced an author who can dip into one character's mindset, narrate from their perspective, but then flawlessly pull back out to give you a broad view of the situation that they're in, only to then dip into the opposite character's mindset to give their side of the story as well. She gives you, as the reader, the ability to see and experience every side of a conflict in the smoothest and most adept way imaginable. Eliot knows precisely how to guide the reader through the experience she wants them to have in this book. And the wit and wisdom woven throughout is just top-notch. The next time I read this, I am digging in like knife and fork style because I want to study this. This was apparently the year of me picking up hyped books that I thought I would really enjoy, because my 3rd favorite book of the year is The Unseen World by Liz Moore. This was actually the first book that I read this year, and I could not have started off my reading year on a better note. This is a part coming-of-age, part mystery novel that tells the story of young Ada, who who, up to the point of us meeting her, has been raised by her single father, who is also a brilliant computer scientist, but she is forced to be taken in by her father's co-workers when he starts to experience early onset dementia. After he is formally no longer able to care for Ada anymore, and all of his paperwork is being attended to by Ada's new guardians, it comes to light that her father is not who he claimed to be. The rest of this book is dedicated to Ada coming to terms with that fact, but also trying to discover who her father really was, which includes her using a code that her father left for her as his memory was beginning to fade. This may sound like the setup for a thriller, but this is actually a cozy and geeky, but also sorrowful tale that you'll want to wrap around you like a warm blanket. My second favorite fiction read of 2018 is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. This is the epitome of what I look for in a good gothic tale, and it's bookish to boot. Its setup actually sounds very similar to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but in this case it is obscure biographer Margaret, who is summoned by the prolific yet mysterious author Vida Winter to record her long-hidden life story. The tale she begins to spin is one of odd and dark family origins, of two maladjusted twin sisters, and of an all-consuming fire in the old family home. This is one of the most atmospheric, moody, yet bookish tales I've ever had the luxury of reading, and I loved it so much. So now, very excitingly, I get to tell you about my favorite fiction book of the year. For the second year in a row, Queen Elizabeth Gaskell takes the top spot on my list. Last year it was Wives and Daughters, and this year it is the industrial Pride and Prejudice alike, North and South. Our leading lady in this book is also named Margaret. She has been educated alongside her cousin in the city, but once she comes of age, she is very much looking forward to returning to her parents in the country. But unfortunately, she doesn't get to remain there for very long. Her father, who works for the church, has a crisis of faith and decides to leave his posting. Because he needs to support his family, they move to where he is able to find work as a tutor in the northern industrial town of Milton. Here, Margaret becomes acquainted with not only the mill owner and self-made man, Mr. Thornton, but also a family of mill workers who are paying the ultimate price of working in the dangerous mill environment. Margaret and Mr. Thornton do have that hate to love kind of story arc that earns this book all of its comparisons to Pride and Prejudice, but the fact that their journey is told alongside some of the real issues of the industrial era, and that the story is enhanced by Gaskell's skillful and symbolic misunderstandings between the characters, is what made this story so transcendent for me. I fell head over heels in love with this book this year, and it is now tied with Wives and Daughters as my favorite classic. So those were my favorite fiction books of 2018. I didn't read as many new favorites this year as I would have liked ideally, but a lot of these books made me challenge my worldviews, and they also raised the bar for me when it comes to storytelling and writing, and for that, I'm extremely grateful. I did condense my feelings on each of these books, so this video didn't turn into a 30-minute long gush fest, but if you are interested in hearing more of my thoughts on any of these books, I will put links down in the description box below to the specific timestamps within my monthly wrap-ups where I give my commentary on these books when I originally read them. If you have comments or questions about anything you've seen in this video or about anything in general, please feel free to put that in the comment section below. But if you'd like to reach out to me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles are linked in the description box below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in 2019. Bye!